leaky gut. Let's talk about it for a second. What is a leaky gut? How does the gut become leaky?
Yeah, great question. And in fact, we're doing a large-scale human clinical trial on that right now. And I have some great pilot data already. We're doing it with the University of North Texas. So if you imagine the gut lining, okay, the gut lining is the actual true separation of the inside and the outside of the body. Now, most people think your dermal layer, your skin, is a separation of the inside and outside of the body. That's actually not true because, of course, we have all these wonderful orifices all over ourselves, right? Our nose, our ears, our mouth, everything else. And all of these orifices are covered by something called a mucosal layer. Okay, so it's covered with mucus. As you know, that's snot and mucus that comes out of your nose. Your esophagus, your gut lining, everything's covered by mucus. And then underneath the mucus layer is something called the epithelial layer. The epithelial layer is a single layer of cells. It's a very, very thin layer, but it's where all disease starts and where health and disease happens. Okay, so that's the true lining between the outside and the inside of the body. Anything on this side of the mucosal and epithelial is actually the outside of the body. If it gets through, which is in the sense of leaky gut, that means it's moving inside the body and the body freaks out. So imagine a bunch of cells that stand next to each other like this, like little soldier cells. They stand next to each other shoulder to shoulder, and the space in between them is called a tight junction. Okay, so the tight junction can open and close in a dynamic function. Now, why would the tight junction ever open? Well, because the intestinal lining is also designed to absorb nutrients, right? So some nutrients are supposed to induce the opening of the tight junction so they can move in between the cells and get into the system. Now, what happens is the tight junction is supposed to close back. And there are 40 different proteins called claudin and occludin proteins that control the opening and closing of the tight junctions. What happens is when you have a lot of inflammation in your gut, when you have dysbiosis, when you have a bad microbiome, when you have a poor functioning immune system, the tight junction proteins don't function as well and the lining just stays open. And this is literally leaky gut. So literally the spaces between the cells, which is technical term is a paracellular pathway, stays open, stays leaky, so all the toxins from your gut and all the bacteria and everything else is just leaking through on a daily basis. What that does is on the other side, the inside part of the body, it's causing a huge inflammatory reaction, which then is expressed to the rest of the tissue. A great example of that is HIV. Okay, so most people think HIV, when people are HIV positive, they actually die because of the virus. No, they actually die because of an accelerated, amplified leaky gut phenomenon.
Wow.
So yeah, what's happening in HIV is the virus is infecting CD4 positive T cells in the mucosa right above this layer of soldier cells, right? And that constant inflammation is actually separating the cells and causing a really, really big induction of leaky gut. And in fact, in HIV, the degree of leaky gut is a better predictor of mortality than viral load itself.
Wow.
So the more leaky gut HIV patients have, the more highly likely is they will die from the disease than viral load. They could have a very high viral load and tight leaky gut. So that layer is the crucial layer. So the question is, what can you do to keep that tight junction tight and not leaky? And that's really where it comes down to. In fact, every autoimmune condition, every chronic infection, every immune dysfunction, every chronic disease, everything like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, everything is now associated with that one tissue layer and how leaky it is.
Wow. Okay. So why is it so hard to repair it then? I mean, and can you talk about how long does it usually take for you to get a leaky gut? Because like I said, I didn't know I was allergic to things for a long time. And I was just, continually eating the stuff that was apparently hurting my body. And I had no idea until I started getting these tests that everything I was eating, I was allergic to.
Yeah. Now, you weren't necessarily allergic to them to begin with. You became allergic to them because of the continuous inflammation in the lining of the gut.
Okay.
So, in fact, what can happen is unless you fix that lining and you fix the mucosal and the immune reaction in that area, you will continue to become allergic to more things. And it's the same cascade which leads to autoimmune disorders as well. right? So
Mm-hmm.
people aren't born with thyroid disorders, with Hashimoto's. People aren't born with rheumatoid arthritis. Even the autoimmune condition known as type 1 diabetes is now been found to be microbiome related. You're actually not born with it in your genes. It's actually caused by microbes in the gut or a certain dysbiosis in the gut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening there is the leaky gut can be caused by a single meal. Now, in our study, the way we're inducing leaky gut in people, so certain people have more susceptibility to leaky gut because they don't have a strong microbiome, they don't have a strong mucosal immune system, and they can be susceptible to leaky gut from outside stimuli, right?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest outside stimuli that induces leaky gut are two things. One is stress. Stress induces leaky gut very potently, and number two is food. So the food you eat actually induces leaky gut. So in our study, the way we're inducing leaky gut is we're taking healthy college students, we're sitting them down in the lab, and then we're feeding them a McDonald's breakfast, right? And hash browns, egg McMuffin, wash it down with the soda is a great way to cause leaky gut. And for the next 5 hours, we can measure the amount of endotoxins that build up in their serum that demonstrate how leaky their gut is becoming because in response to that one meal. So every time you eat, you're opening the lining and all these toxins are going through. So this is likely what happened to you. Now these are 20-something healthy college students, right? They have no symptoms of anything. They have no thyroid dysfunction. They have no autoimmune conditions. They have nothing. They seem healthy, but they have a high propensity for leaky gut. And every time they eat, they're getting this endotoxic reaction, right? And this endotoxic reaction actually takes them 14 days to recover from a single meal.
From one meal, you're saying?
From one meal. It takes them 14 days to recover from that inflammation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they are in their 20s. They're eating all these meals. They're eating junk food. They're drinking. They're doing all these things. They're getting this continuous endotoxic reaction, continuous inflammatory reaction in the rest of the body. That is setting them up for, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, having thyroid dysfunctions, hormone imbalances, autoimmune conditions, ulcerative colitis, allergies, asthma, so on and so forth. The prevalence of leaky gut we found so far in screening college students is about 65%. So there's about 35% of the students that we can feed the McDonald's breakfast to, you see no leakiness in the gut at all.
Mm-hmm.
So they tend to have a strong microbiome. They tend to have a strong mucosal system. But the other 65%, one meal, and they have 14 days of inflammation. And at that age, they're young, their body can deal with it, but it's setting them up for this long-term inflammatory reaction that actually damages the immune system and causes autoimmune reactions, allergic reactions, and so on. So it's a long-term thing, you know? So every meal that you ate in your 20s is what set you up for the problems that you're having now, you know, or the problems you did have until you really started working hard to cure yourself.
I mean, you literally just described my college diet.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would say I probably ate like that for a good, 10 of my like developmental years, let's call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when people now knowing that, one meal, it might take 14 days for you to recover from it, a lot of people will say, well, I'm 80% gluten-free when they have a gluten sensitivity, or, when I'm 90% dairy-free. How does that play into that concept? I mean, it basically sounds like if you're receiving any sort of reaction and you're not 100%, you're constantly keeping that cycle going. Am I correct?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Now, I will comment on another thing about that is that as humans, we are designed to be omnivores, right? As a species, we ate everything. And as omnivores, that allowed us to move up the evolutionary ladder and we became the predominant species on Earth. So we really shouldn't be sensitive to gluten. We shouldn't be sensitive to dairy. So if you have a sensitivity to those things, it's an inherent problem to begin with. Now, you're totally right that if the sensitivity is not curbed, and if you're not doing things to help your body deal with gluten and deal with dairy, and you continue to expose yourself to it, even that 10 or 15 or 20% of the time, it is inducing a postprandial, which means after meal, endotoxemia, which is a toxic reaction. So that's what the whole system is called. It's called postprandial endotoxemia, so after meal toxic reaction. Now, there's no reason why with the right therapy in place that you shouldn't be able to expose yourself to gluten and dairy and things like that and not have the endotoxemic reaction. Of course, if you are full-blown celiac, that's a different question. But most people are not full-blown celiac. Most people have some degree of sensitivity to gluten. So what we find with patients we work with is once we get them through and we re-heal the gut and we change the architecture of the gut lining, they can have gluten every once in a while. They can have dairy every once in a while. They can have the foods that typically would bother them, but it would have no negative effect anymore because they have a strong microbiome to defend themselves. They have a strong mucosa to defend themselves. So it never gets down to that epithelial layer that freaks out when it sees these kind of antigens.
So slightly off topic, do you have an opinion on this gluten controversy in terms of, is it our wheat? Is it the gluten in our wheat? Is it the way we've crossbred the wheat? Is it the glyphosate that we're being sprayed? Do you know, I mean, is there research that you've read? And what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. But to summarize it, yes, we're not, as a species, we're not used to seeing the type of gluten that we find in wheat today. There's no similarity at all between the wheat that we have today and through the course of the agricultural age for human evolution, right? So the agricultural age is even not, by itself, is not that long. For the most part of human evolution, we were hunters and gatherers and foragers. The agricultural age came on a few hundred years ago, but even then, the type of wheat that we had was totally different than the wheat we have today, which is all GMO, crossbred, tend to have a different type of gluten. So what's happened is, for that 65% of people, like we're screening the college kids, who tend not to have a strong microbiome, tend not to have a strong mucosa, their body cannot handle the exposure to this new type of gluten, which is a new antigen. So what happens is it's a new antigen and your body freaks out like an allergic response, right? So it sees it, it doesn't know what it is, so it releases all these histamines, all these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which causes a continuous inflammatory response, which can then damage the lining of the gut. Now, on top of that, you add the glyphosate, which is the Roundup and all those things, which also cause a die-off in the microbiome. So you're further hurting the microbiome that should be protecting you against these inflammatory responses. Your body is supposed to be able to deal with these things, but without a healthy microbiome, because of the environment and the antibiotics that we use and the fluoride in our food and the types of food that we consume, the lack of diversity in our nutrition, all those things lead to lower microbiome status and thus lower ability to deal with the exposure to gluten. What you'll find is there are people like myself. I have no problem with gluten at all. I can eat gluten every day, all day long. I get no inflammatory response from it at all. My microbiome happens to be at a point where I can deal with it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't always like that. In fact, I actually had pretty strong symptoms of IBS for a long time in college, which came on in college, no surprise, right? And so after college, I had a lot of gut issues, and until I started studying the gut as a microbiologist and understanding what it is, what needs to be done to fix it, I haven't been, I've suffered from symptoms myself, but right now I could eat gluten 7 days a week and have no issue at all, and no symptoms of it.
Wow. A question popped up I wanted to ask you, which was, I don't know, we'll have to circle back around to it, but it was, shoot, I hate when they fly away.
I know. They'll fly back though.
Well, yeah, they'll fly back in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about because I watched another interview you were on, and I heard you say that our microbiome can actually program our brains to go to the store and want to buy a cupcake, and I want to know all about that, and I want to know, how does that happen?
Yeah, so great question. We think of our microbiome now, scientists are starting to call it our second brain. But really, when you look into it, it's our first brain. Okay, because the brain controls virtually every other part of the body, right? So virtually everything you do, your blinking, your heartbeat, your skeletal muscle movement, everything is controlled by the brain. But there's one organ in the entire body, which is the digestive tract, which can operate totally independent of the brain. And in fact, the brain seems to have less control over the microbiome than the microbiome has on the brain. So really, who is the first brain? You know, it's the one that has the most control, right? So if you think about your gut lining, underneath the gut lining, there's something called the enteric nervous system, which is a very, very highly dense nerve system that covers everything from your mouth all the way down to your rectum and your anus, which is, you know, all the way down to the bottom. So the enteric nervous system then connects through your central nervous system using the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a nerve that goes directly to your brain. So the bacteria in your gut, through the enteric nervous system, have direct access to your brain. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they have the uncanny ability to produce neurotransmitters and proteins and peptides that affect thought and function and cravings and all that. And they will send that through the enteric nervous system, up the vagus nerve, right into your brain, and affect what you think, how you think, your outlook on life, the foods you crave, the things you want to do, your motivation, everything. They affect everything. A huge study was done on women, especially in women of childbearing age, moms, young moms, perimenopausal women. And what they found was that women who consumed effective probiotics and did things that helped their digestive tract actually had a better outlook on life than women who didn't. Wow. So the ability to change your outlook on life, which is your personality, right? Are you a pessimist? Are you an optimist? Do you see the glass half empty, half full? That is determined by the microbes in your gut. It's fascinating. And so when you think about things like anxiety, depression, stress response, all of that is controlled by the gut bacteria. How well you deal with the daily stresses in your life. If you're a young mom, you have kids. We all know that kids, as wonderful as they are, they can drive you crazy, right? Absolutely crazy. Yeah. And how well you deal with that stress is determined by the types of bacteria you have in your gut, because they control something called the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic, adrenal, and pituitary axis, which actually manages stress hormone response and other hormones that control your response to outside stimuli and stress, and the gut microbiome controls that. So when you have an overgrowth of candida, for example, or an overgrowth of specific types of bacteria that crave sugar, they will actually make neurotransmitters that they send up your brain to make you want to eat sugar and make you crave sugar. They will make you feel like you're hungry. They will even make you feel hypoglycemic, which is something I talk to people about, because I often advocate, intermittent fasting as a therapy that is really useful in modulating the microbiome. But a lot of people will tell me, well, if I don't eat for a few hours, I start to feel hypoglycemic, like my blood sugar is low. And I'm like, well, are you diabetic? And they say, well, no, I'm not diabetic. Then I'm like, well, your blood sugar is not low. Because if you're not diabetic, it takes 3 days for your blood sugar to actually become hypoglycemic without eating. Right? So 6 hours is not enough time for you to become hypoglycemic. You feel like that because what's happening is the candida is sending aldehydes, which is a form of alcohol, into your system that's going to your brain, that's making you feel kind of woozy and off balance. It's making you feel that brain fog, that memory loss. It's making you feel less attentive. All of those things are controlled by the bacteria in your gut. Another point to make there is I talked about the gut barrier, right? The soldier cells that make up the gut barrier. It's the same exact tissue that controls the brain barrier as well. So when your gut is leaky, you can assume your brain is leaky. So leaky gut means leaky brain. And what does leaky brain mean? Well, it means a lot of toxins are going into your brain and not being protected by the blood-brain barrier. And that's causing inflammation in the brain. That gives you a lot of fog, fatigue, memory loss, things like that. So it's connected. It all starts in the gut, and the microbes control all of that.
Yeah, this is priceless information, especially for moms, because hearing that, first of all, what's going on in your gut can really determine like what you're going to reach for when you want to eat and what you're going to crave. Because I know whenever I get stressed, I feel like compelled that I have to go get a gluten-free chocolate brownie. Compelled, you know.
Right.
Where in general, I'm really disciplined about what I eat. But when I'm stressed, it like all falls apart, right? So, and you know, the stress is affecting my gut.
Yeah.
And you know, but what I heard you say that I'm going to take with me was that really focusing on that gut health can help how you, in a way, end up parenting or handling some of these parenting conflicts that come up.
Yes.
Because it is a challenge having a kid and it can, you know, it can create so much stress when you're trying to manage it all. So that this should be a real priority, I guess. I mean, that's what I'm kind of pinging my listeners for, is saying like, this needs to be a priority to work on this gut.
Yeah, I mean, you know, moms. One of the beauties of moms, and one of the great things that women have is this amazing nurturing nature, right? So when they become moms, they forget about themselves and they really focus and put so much into their kids. But what you forget is that your gut, your microbes will determine how well you can actually parent, because it affects your outlook on everything. And it affects how you deal with your kids, who are going to be a big pain in the butt no matter what you do, right? I mean, as beautiful and wonderful as they are, they have their moments, and they have a lot of those moments. And how well you deal with it, and how it affects your body, how often you get sick, whether or not that's going to end up inducing an autoimmune response or a allergic response, all determines on your gut. So one of the things about autoimmunity that people don't understand is there's a little bit of a triad that causes autoimmunity. So the first part is you have to have dysbiosis in your microbiome, right? Meaning a not healthy microbiome. Second part of it is an issue with how your body's immune system reacts to things. So if your immune system reacts in a very pro-inflammatory way, a very pro-innate immune reaction way, it makes you susceptible to autoimmunity. The third part is an outside stimulus. Right? So that outside stimulus can be an environmental trigger. You know, let's say you get exposed to preservatives, glyphosate, whatever it may be, or you go on vacation and get exposed to something that your body's not used to, that can trigger it. A viral or bacterial infection, or stress. And the stress can be your kid. So your kid can actually induce your autoimmune. Right? So
it's another thing to hold over their heads for the rest of their life.
Exactly. You know, it's like, listen, I grew you in my tummy, I birthed you out, I fed you, and I am now diseased because of you. And so, you know, poor moms, I mean, they go through an immense amount of stress, but taking care of their gut and modulating their gut is going to be extremely important for everything that they do in their life. You know, even the way you drive is affected by your gut, because your motor neurons that control your reflex and your body's coordination capability is controlled by your gut. So you're driving your kids around with a frazzled mind and a high stress mind. It's going to affect your gut, which is affected by your gut. It also affects your motor neurons. It affects how safely you're traveling with your kids in the car. So it's everything. It's everything, literally.
It really is. And earlier you said something about, you know, looking at your life half glass full and half glass empty. And I have found that, you know, the clients of mine who really heal are the ones who have hope, who know they can, who trust their body. And a lot of people are just trying to overcome that base level of depression that's coming from this gut dysbiosis and what's going on in the brain as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's everything, just like you said. And, I remembered my question.
It flew back. It flew back. I knew it.
Flew back in. So a lot of people, when, you know, I'm suggesting, you know, trying to go on the gluten-free diet for a period of time, they say, well, I'm not allergic to gluten. I have no reactions when I have gluten, you know, blah, 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 because they really don't feel any symptoms. But then when they do a test of going off gluten for a period of time, and then they add it back in, all of a sudden they've noticed all the symptoms. So, but what do you say to the person who just feels like they don't have any sort of reaction because they're not actually seeing the symptoms, or they're not actually relating certain symptoms that they're having to this?
Yeah, and in fact, I see this all the time with gluten and with digestive issues in general. You know, we've actually surveyed hundreds of people and just asking them whether or not they feel that they have digestive issues, and they will typically say, "No, I think my digestion is perfectly fine. My gut's fine." And then we give them this actual survey to rate symptomology, and then what they find is by the time they go through the survey, they have a lot of symptoms. And their scores tend to be fairly high for having digestive issues. But what people do is they learn to live with these symptoms. They think it's normal. You know, I was just working with somebody yesterday who said that she always felt it was normal for her to wake up in the morning and have a little bit of bloat in her stomach. You know, and she never thought of herself as someone that has gut issues, but she always kind of complained about it without really knowing about it. And so her friends always pegged her as the girl with the gut issues because her friends hear the complaints much more than she does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so finally now she's accepting that, yeah, I do have gut issues. You know, I do have symptoms that bother me that I shouldn't have and that I don't need to live with. And finally, she's on the road to kind of healing that. So I say to people all the time, yes, I think everybody, if you have any sort of gut issue, unless you've really done things to improve your microbiome and your gut, you will have some sensitivity to things like gluten and dairy and allergens and all that. You will have it no matter what. And then you'll only figure it out until you go off of it and come back again. But what you find is you can go off of it. If you treat the gut in the right way and heal it, you can come back again and not have those symptoms anymore. But everybody has gut issues. You know, people just learn to live with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know just after using MegaSpore myself, like I was able to bring cheese back into my menu, and that was like super happy moment for me.
Yes.
So, I mean, I can definitely see those results. And so I want to talk a little bit about MegaSpore because, you know, there are just thousands of probiotics everywhere in the market, and it's super overwhelming, and it's frustrating to figure out, you know, which one to take. And so I know I've had this great experience with MegaSpore. What, you touched on it earlier, but can you like boil it down again? Like what makes MegaSpore so different from all these other ones?
Yeah, so one of the things is that in nature, we are designed to actually require the exposure to these particular strains in order for our gut to function properly. So they are a very essential part of our gut. But in nature, we're supposed to gain exposure to them from the outside environment. Right. So after we're born, we get most of our bacteria, 99.99% of the bacteria that we have in our gut, we get from mom. That's through the birthing process and through breastfeeding and close interaction with mom and dad. About 2.5 years after birth, you've got your full adult microbiome. All the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria you're ever going to have is in your gut. The rest of your life, you're interacting with the environment. Now, in the environment, there are certain organisms that are supposed to be in your gut, which are called postnatal, meaning after birth, commensal organisms. So commensal meaning organisms that are symbiotic and actually perform a function in the gut. And our early ancestors, again, who were hunters, gatherers, who lived amongst the dirt and in the land, they got huge exposure to these spores, to these bacillus spores that we have in MegaSporebiotic. We don't have exposure to those spores anymore. Because we live in a sterile world, most of us live in concrete jungles. Both you and I are living in houses that are closed off to the environment, right? And we rarely see actual nature. You know, our yards are made up of sod or engineered soil and grass. So our yard is not nature, you know. We don't go on hikes and things like that much. We don't eat dirt, really, at the end of it. And our ancestors used to eat dirt. So MegaSpore is made up of a very specialized classification of bacteria that we're supposed to gain exposure to after birth, who live in our gut and protect our gut. They are the police of the gut. So here's a few things they do in your gut that are extremely, extremely important. First thing, they use something called quorum sensing, which they read the microbial environment. They can actually find and detect bad and harmful and pathogenic organisms, including Candida, and eliminate them by competitively excluding them or by producing antibiotics. They produce up to 25 different antibiotics in the gut itself to kill off bad bacteria. So because of that capability, they're used in Europe and in Asia as a prescription treatment for gut infections rather than an antibiotic, because they do it in a much better way without hurting the good bacteria. because at the same time, they produce compounds like subtilicin to actually grow your good natural bacteria. So they're actually shifting the balance of good and bad bacteria, which becomes a permanent shift in your body. And that's the imbalance of good and bad bacteria is really what's causing all the problems, right, to begin with. The other thing they do is they help you digest your food. They produce a full array of digestive enzymes, so they actually allow you to break down your food and then absorb it through the intestinal tract. I always tell people it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb, right? People used to always say you are what you eat, but you could be somebody that's making all the right choices in your lifestyle, eating all the healthy foods, but if you're not getting the nutrients out of the healthy foods by breaking it down, digesting it appropriately, you're just not getting the benefit out of it. So I'll hear a lot of people that say, I eat really healthy, or eat really clean, yet I have this issue, that issue. Well, I say, well, because you're not absorbing it. Your food, health from healthy food comes from the digestion. It's not that the foods are inherently healthy and it's automatically going to get in your body. You have to digest and break it down. The other thing they do is they modulate the immune system. They are very powerful at upregulating something called a Treg system. This is your regulatory T cells that regulate unfavorable immune responses. That's why they're so effective against allergies, food allergies, environmental allergies, any kind of allergies you have, even pet allergies. What they do is they upregulate the system in your body that identifies unfavorable immune responses and suppresses them. That's your body's natural defense against allergies, autoimmune reactions, and things that you just don't want to see happen. Now, the fourth part is they actually seal up the gut. So we are the first probiotic company to ever do a human clinical trial on leaky gut and show that our probiotic can actually seal up the gut. We talked about how all the inflammation causes the cells to open up and things to leak through, especially after every meal that you eat. What we found is that even in the McDonald's food challenge, after 30 days, these college kids that have leaky gut in the first time, after 30 days, their guts are totally sealed. There's no endotoxic reaction anymore in just 30 days. And we're talking about college kids. So we're not sending them off in 30 days and making them go on a healthy diet or do some herbal therapy. They're still doing all the stuff they're doing that hurts their gut. All they're doing is taking MegaSpore. They come back 30 days later, their gut is totally sealed, no more negative reaction to the McDonald's breakfast. That prevention of that negative reaction alleviates all the inflammation that happens to the gut lining, which is the start and the cause of autoimmunity, allergies, and everything else. So MegaSpore stays in your gut. It gets there alive. It stays in your gut. It actually changes the architecture of your intestinal lining. It totally changes the response of your immune system, and it has a profound effect then in your overall health. It can actually make that functional change, which probiotics just can't do.
Right. So then go in briefly, just specifically, so people understand, how does MegaSpore specifically help people with a thyroid or an autoimmune condition?
Yeah, so specifically what is happening is if you have a thyroid or autoimmune condition, it means you have two things going wrong. Your microbial endocrine system is not functioning properly. Most people don't know that every hormone that the thyroid makes is also made in the gut by your gut bacteria. And in fact, a lot of times, whether you're hypo or hyperthyroid, your brain calls on your gut bacteria to make up for the hormones that you're lacking. And if you're not making those hormones, your thyroid's going to go into stress and have issues. The other thing is the autoimmunity is dysregulation of the Treg system that I talk about, that T regulatory function. So MegaSpore gets in there, it improves the diversity of your microbiome, it increases the growth of all the good bacteria that you're supposed to have that make all your hormones and help you regulate your hormones, and actually can create a balance in terms of what your thyroid produces from a hormone standpoint. Now, the autoimmune portion of it, the autoimmune attack of the thyroid, is actually something that can be suppressed by the Treg system. So when MegaSpore gets in, it interacts with their immune system in the gut. It upregulates the Treg system. The Treg sees these autoantibodies. These are the antibodies that attack your own tissue. Then it starts suppressing the production of that and eliminating the B cells that actually produce these autoantibodies. So for Hashimoto's, for example, we actually have patients where after a couple months on the MegaSpore, you can start measuring their antibody titers, and you can start seeing the antibodies titers go down and down and down and down to a point where they're undetectable, meaning the disease is gone. So then when you stop attacking your thyroid, then your thyroid can go back to functioning normally. It's no longer inflamed. You're no longer going through all those problems. So Megaspore has a direct effect on the immune system and on the hormone balance to affect change with people undergoing that condition.
So people could, and I've had a lot of these kind of results, but people could see their food sensitivities go away or their food allergies go away, correct? Mm-hmm. Their antibodies, those counts go down. They could see more clarity, more energy, less brain fog. Is there anything else, any other results that they could expect to see?
Yeah, so some of the things that we hear very often are huge reduction in cravings. So it eliminates the sugar cravings. All the simple stuff with the gut, the gas, bloating, indigestion, response to food, that tends to go away. And that tends to go away pretty quickly, usually within the first week or two for a lot of people. Your food sensitivities, of course, your energy levels, your brain function, as you mentioned. But another thing is just your mood, your outlook on life, how you deal with stress, your depression levels. 95% of your serotonin, the happy hormone, is produced in the gut. And the latest studies show that the spore-forming bacteria are the ones that control serotonin production in the gut, which are the bacillus spores. These are spore-forming bacteria. So what you can see is an increase in serotonin production, which means gut motilities improve, dopamine levels go up, serotonin levels go up, you actually feel better. You deal with stress better, your whole outlook on life can change. And for a lot of people, what we found is, they've been doing a lot of therapies, they've been doing a lot of diet modifications, they've been doing a lot of herbal things and whatnot. This seems to be, in many cases, kind of the last piece of the puzzle, to make your gut function the way it was designed to function so that you can actually enjoy all the benefits of your healthy diet and your other nutritional therapies that you may be doing. So it can be quite life-changing, and we just have thousands and thousands of testimonials from people. We have now in the US over 3,500 doctors and practitioners that use the product. So we've got on a regular basis well over 30,000 patients on the product. So we get a lot of great feedback from people, and we just see amazing things happening.
Yeah, well, I know I've experienced it. My clients have experienced the benefit. And as I understand it, you're not offering it just like at Walmart or CVS or anything, because you really want to make sure people are getting the correct dosage and that they're being monitored. And can you tell us a little bit more about why?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very important one. So it's a powerful product. One of the first things it's going to do when it gets in your system is it's going to start to kill off harmful organisms, right? And if you have a very leaky gut and you're killing off a high degree of harmful organisms, you can have detox type of reactions or cramping and bloating and things that might not feel good at first. And so a lot of patients then get worried, like, am I getting worse? And that's a reasonable question to ask. Well, you're not getting worse. It's actually a good sign, but it may not be something you want to deal with. And so in order to avoid that, we typically taper people up on the dose. So keep in mind that the full dose of the product is 2 capsules a day taken at the same time with the meal. That's the full dose. But you want to get to that. You don't start with that. Most people, we start at 1 capsule or even a half a capsule every other day. And people might often ask, well, how do you do a half a capsule? Well, you can pull the capsule apart, sprinkle half the powder into any food or drink. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. It can be hot or cold drink or food. It doesn't make a difference. They're extremely stable. And you do that once every other day until your system just feels normal. If you don't feel anything, that's actually great. That means, okay, it's not too much for your system. Then you can go from a half or 1 cap to every other day to a half or 1 cap every day. And when you scale up, if you still feel okay, after a week or so, then scale up to the next level. So you just kind of work yourself up slowly. Now, when you go up, if you feel too much bloating, cramping, or you feel a little, detox type of reactions, then you can always scale back down and stay at the lower dose for a few more days. It just means your body's not quite ready yet to get to that next level. So you kind of have to go through this trial period to get to the main dose, which is going to start making all the big changes. And unfortunately, positive changes in the gut can also present with negative symptoms, the cramping and the bloating and all that. In fact, the bad bacteria that you're killing off will make a last-ditch effort and release all kinds of toxins to try to fight and stay alive, and that can be a negative symptom, So what we found is if you take 100 people and you put all 100 of them on 2 caps a day starting right off the bat, 85% of them will be totally fine and feel great and do well. But about 15% of them or 25% of them will feel some negative symptoms, and it's hard to tell who those 25% is. So that 15% is, and so we scale everybody up. So our recommendation is scale up, start slowly, and move up in the dose. And once you get to the full dose of 2 caps a day, you usually start to see some very noticeable changes after the first couple of weeks.
For sure. I mean, I have tested this probiotic myself, and I'm just a huge fan. And everything you're saying is right. And I even started myself off at a quarter of a thing. I'm always really careful. And then very quickly, I saw those results. So if you're ready to repair that gut of yours, then you can order Megaspore on this blog below the recording. So Kiran, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys. I love your audience. Your audience are the kind of people that can so much benefit from this product, and that's exactly why we produced it. We had no intention 4 years ago to ever put out a product into the market. I was very strictly on the research side of things, but we saw this need and we saw that how many people it could help. And so that's why we're here today. And we're so grateful to be able to get through people like you who reach the audience that needs it. So thank you so much for having me as well. And I'm always available for questions and things like that. So send them through if you have. We're happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I have to say this was life-changing when I started this probiotic. I mean, and I'm one of those people who are like, I don't believe in magic pills. It takes a long time to get into a disease. Sometimes it takes a long time to get out of it. But then taking this, I'm like, this is a magic pill when it comes to leaky gut. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you.